Listen. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this side event with the Environmental Awareness Group. The Honorable Dean Jonas, Minister responsible for the Blue Economy, Dr. David Cooper, Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biodiversity. Colleagues, good morning. I'd also like to recognize our virtual participants who may be tuning in from Glasgow and Antigua. We welcome you as well. So I'm Simone Diaz, the technical advisor for the lead negotiator of the AOSIS Chair, Alliance of Small Island States, and I'll be this morning's moderator. So today we are joined by the Environmental Awareness Group from Antigua and Barbuda, who are presenting on the connection between conservation and resilient ecosystems. Today's session will highlight their work and what they hope for during the climate change negotiations. To begin this morning's session, we invite Dr. David Cooper, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, to provide some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Simone, and thank you very much for the invitation to join this event. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, good. We know that we're facing multiple and urgent crises. And here, I want to focus in particular, obviously, on climate change, as we're here in COP26, and on biodiversity loss, as we continue the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. I just came, in fact, a couple of weeks ago from China, where we had the first part of COP15. And we see really these two issues, these two crises, as really two facets of the same crisis. We are not living within our means. We are not looking after nature. Small island developing states have been at the forefront of these crises and, of course, have played an enormously important role in the negotiations, both in the Convention on Biological Diversity and in the Climate Change Convention. And this is not surprising, because we know that you are at the front line of these crises, in particular from climate change, but also from biodiversity loss. There are multiple drivers of biodiversity loss, and one of them is climate change. We will not be able to address the climate crisis the biodiversity crisis if we don't address the climate crisis. And as we'll hear today, a key aspect of addressing the climate crisis is also building resilient ecosystems so that we can mitigate climate change, but also adapt to the unavoidable effects of climate change. Another of the key drivers of biodiversity loss is invasive alien species, especially in island states. And we're going to hear, I think, about some very impressive work in Antigua and Barbuda on addressing this threat, on removing invasive species from the islands of Antigua and Barbuda and allowing ecosystems to be restored. A message, I think, that is particularly important also as we enter the United Nations Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. In all of these issues, we've had a lot of analysis. We know that we have major problems both with climate change and biodiversity loss. We have analysis from the IPCC, from IPBES, that tells us what the world must do. We know that we have to address the direct drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change and the underlying drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change. The key challenge, in my view, as we move to address these crises, and we have to address them this decade, this is really our last chance this decade, is to implement these broad approaches that we know need to be made from our global analysis, but to do them in a bottom-up way that involves the people. And I think this is, again, where we're going to hear about the strength of the approach of the Environmental Awareness Group the NGO in Antigua and Barbuda, which from its name is obvious. It's about raising awareness and engaging people, in this case, in this particular challenge of addressing invasive alien species. So I'm very happy to be here, to have been invited to address you just for a few minutes here, both given the important role of the island developing states, but also given the really important role of communities and of NGOs in mobilizing and engaging those communities in the twin fights against biodiversity loss and climate change. So welcome, and I look forward, I won't be able to stay for the whole, but I look forward to hearing from Arika and your colleagues in this event this morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper, for setting that very important context and the context in which we'll understand the upcoming presentation from the AAG. So today's speakers, Ms. Arika Hill, Executive Director of the EAG, and Ms. Shanna Challenger. I welcome you to take the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Excellent. My name is Arika Hill. I'm the Executive Director of the EAG.
I'm Shanna Challenger, Offshore Islands Conservation Program Coordinator with the EAG.
And good morning again. So this morning we are going to be speaking about biodiversity conservation and how it underpins ecosystem resilience and for locally led climate action. No? Thank you. So very quickly about the Environmental Awareness Group. We are the longest standing environmental NGO in Antigua and Barbuda, having been at the forefront of this work for over 30 years. Our tagline is, for the benefit of people and wildlife. We believe that there's a very strong link between those two things, and that it's important for persons not just to care about the wildlife, but for the wildlife to be an integral part of their lives as well. We also believe that work should not just be worthwhile, but it should have a hint of adventure. Now, one of the core pillars of the Environmental Awareness Group's work is biodiversity conservation. And to have a conversation about biodiversity conservation this morning is Shanna Challenger.
All right, let me just raise the mic a little bit. Great. Chris, we're ready to go? All right. So first of all, biodiversity conservation, it is a core pillar of the EAG, and today we're starting off with islands. We're here in the AOSIS Pavilion, of course, so let's start with who we are. We're surrounded by water. We're geographically isolated, right? And we actually compose 5.3% of the entire Earth's land area. And we are characterized by high levels of endemism, meaning animals and plants that are, of course, only found on those islands and nowhere else in the world. And we are inextricably linked to our environment. It is in the fabric of us as a people because, of course, our being island people, it has our culture, it has our health, our well-being. We completely depend on the environment for who we are. But even though we are geographically isolated and it's great, it also means that we are extremely vulnerable because of our sizes and our locations. It means that we are on the front line of disaster, as Dr. Cooper would have mentioned. And in addition to this, we're also dealing with a number of non-climate stressors, such as pollution, deforestation, habitat loss, etc. Plus, on top of that is globalization and the rise in trade, travel, transport, and tourism, which means a lot of different things, including species that should not be there in the first place, are able to reach our shores. So, let's zone in a little bit more, even further, to just the Caribbean islands. So, the Caribbean, not just known for rum and carnival, we have a number of species that are found there and nowhere else in the entire world. Including a parrotfish, of course, the Cicero parrot, for example. And we are one of the most diverse regions on the planet. And so species that are found nowhere else on Earth. But the Caribbean islands, we are only taking up 0.15% of the Earth's total land area. And on this little area, we have had, since 1500, 10% of the world's bird extinctions, 38% of the world's mammal extinctions, over 65% of the world's reptile extinctions, and over 65% of these extinctions have been caused by invasive alien species. And so when we hear invasive alien species, or IAS, as we might refer to them during this presentation, we're not talking about aliens from space, but species that were introduced outside of their range and then are causing problems to the economy, health, and of course, our biodiversity. So, who likes rats? So, two of these, the black rat and the Indian mongoose, these are two of the most prolific invasive alien species, especially on islands. And in Antigua and Barbuda, these are the main invasive species that we deal with. And so these species, of course, would have been introduced during the European colonization of the Caribbean. And once they got here, they never left. And so we'll be talking about these throughout the rest of the presentation. So a little bit about Antigua and Barbuda's offshore islands. As you can see from the picture behind of us, we're actually already here. Surprise, we're in the Caribbean, right? So our offshore islands are, most of our offshore islands are located within our country's largest marine reserve, the Northeast Marine Management Area, or the NEMA. And these areas are designated as key biodiversity areas and important bird diversity areas because there's such a rich number of wildlife and ecosystems found there. So you can see Northeast area and the islands. So Antigua and Barbuda, we actually have 51 offshore islands. I see some of the Antiguans in the audience looking a little stunned. Yes, it's 51. And they range from 0.1 to 184 hectares. There's a mix of private and public ownership. And of course, they're characterized by limestone and then surrounded by mangroves and fringing coral reefs. And nearly all of our offshore islands, because they're so close to the mainland, have been colonized by invasive alien species. So, it's time. This is the focus species. This is the reason why the EAG started almost, right? And this pictured here is the critically endangered Antiguan racer, which was once widespread across both Antigua and Barbuda, but because of the rats and mongooses that I would have showed earlier, have been taken off of the mainland and restricted to just one offshore island. And so this racer, you see it has a nice friendly face. It is completely harmless, no poison, no venom. They grow to about 3 to 4 feet in length. They're actually sexually dimorphic, meaning that you can tell the difference in the sexes. So the ladies are, you know, light colored, preparing for oohs and ahs. And then the males are a lot darker in color, right? And their favorite food, is lizards. And because they were so few in number and hard to find, they were actually accidentally declared extinct twice. So, like I would have said, they were rediscovered on one offshore island, this island that we're actually standing on right now, Great Bird Island. And in 1995, only 50 Antiguan racers remained on the entire planet, leading us to, unfortunately, get the designation of having the world's rarest snake. And so one of the things that we realized with the snakes is that most of them were maimed by rats. And so as you can see, Right here in the tip of the tails of the racers is actually where their reproductive organs are. And so since it was bitten off by the rats, you have a bunch of sterile animals unable to reproduce. And so if the invasive mammals were removed from this island, could we see something different? Could the species and the ecosystem recover? So the EAG, we are eradication specialists, if we do say so ourselves, and we actually cut grids across the islands at different widths, and we use a poison known as claret, which has an active ingredient of brodifocum, and we place this every 30 to 40 meters, which is basically the home range of a rat, to make sure that every rat gets a piece of the bait, and we check them daily for about 2 months to make sure that the rats are eating it down. And so from the work that we've done, what are the results that we've been able to see? So firstly, the EAG, we use something called fixed point photographs, basically standing in the same place and taking a picture over the years. And you can see, there we go, the difference in vegetation between 1995 and 2012 at this exact same area, seeing that the ecosystem and the habitat has definitely recovered. Additionally, the racers increased by more than 20-fold. We actually ended up reintroducing them to 3 other offshore islands, and I'm happy to report to date, from 50, we have gone to over 1,200 Antiguan racers. Yeah, let's give it up for them. We have over 1,200 racers today on 4 different islands. And in addition to the snakes, we also realized that the birds were also increasing. So not just, even though we did this intervention just for the snakes, the birds that were there, a lot of them were coming back, increasing by to 20-fold, as well as the fact that we realized on islands where rats were still present, seabirds were simply not breeding. I mean, who would want to breed on a rat-infested island, right? And so to date, we have replicated this method and successfully cleared 17 offshore islands of rats and mongooses since 1995, with major benefits for people and wildlife, as our motto says. And so in 2016, we decided, how can we challenge ourselves further? How can we upscale this a bit higher? And we decided to do this on Redondo, which is actually the 3rd island of Antigua and Barbuda, even though it looks like it shouldn't be. And so as you can see, it's quite a distance away. It is completely uninhabited. And this is how the EAG found Redondo in 2008, right? Redondo, Spanish word, actually means round, but as you can see, it has completely chipped off and broken, and you can see the island was literally falling into the sea. In fact, you can see the sole tree that was remaining on Redondo. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what could possibly be living over there? Despite this fact, we had a number of wildlife that were still present there, including regionally and globally significant seabird nesting, including this little mass booby family, very cute. And we also had 3 species of lizards found nowhere else on the world. So the critically endangered endemic, the Redondo tree lizard, the Redondo ground dragon, and the Redondo pygmy gecko, which was actually only discovered in 2009 and still doesn't have a scientific name yet. That's how new it is to science. In addition, we also have some unique plants found over there, such as a jumping cacti, which makes staying over there for a week very interesting when we do so. And so with this wildlife, you're probably wondering, how did Redondo get to that state that we saw in the first picture? And as always, the rats stowed away, actually on Redondo between 1865 and 1914, because there were so many nesting seabirds. At the time, guano was the gold, and over 100 workers were living over there. And with them, they brought a population of black rats, which would eat the vegetation. I'm not sure if anybody has ever seen a rat climbing a cactus, but that's what they were doing on Redondo. They would also hunt the endemic reptiles and kill the seabirds. In addition to the rats, we also had a population of goats that were actually left over on the island. As you can see, he's very skinny and hungry because, of course, on Redondo, there's no fresh water, there's no food, and so the goats were actually dying from starvation over there. And so, if we could remove all of the invasive species, could the species and the ecosystem itself recover? So first of all, we had to relocate the goats, and we actually constructed a self-mustering corral. By the way, Redondo, you can only get there by helicopter. So we helicoptered all of that over there, put in some water, some shade to attract the goats, and we actually ended up hand capturing them. There's one in there, there's one there, and actually flying them to Antigua via helicopter. Yes, some of the goats are doing better than us. So we lived, then with the rat eradication, we lived on Redondo for 2 months, right there, right? And for the 2 months, we divided the island into different lines, and every morning we would check each of these points where we had rat bait laid to check and see how the rat bait was going down. And actually, because it was the peak of the dry season, the rat population collapsed within 2 weeks. And since March 2017, we have not seen any signs of rats since. Thank you. And so, you can play a press play, Chris. This was when we were about to start the Redondo Restoration program. You can see Redondo. This is what was quintessential, what it looked like. You know, degraded, collapsing into the sea. Dry. Yes, Arika. Sad. See a little sargassum in the water. Yep. And then within months, the ecosystem showed, hey, we just need a little help from the humans to get the rats, and then we can take over and do what needs to be done. And so this is an even more up-to-date picture. So from 2012 to 2020, you can see the difference that has been happening, and all of this is natural recolonization. We have not replanted anything. This is all what was available in the seed bank already. And so within only 2 years, we saw an increase in plant biomass to 108-fold, more species of land birds finding Redondo and actually staying around. We've seen an increase in butterflies and other invertebrates, which are, of course, prey for the lizards. We've seen a fall in predation on invertebrates, bird eggs, all of the wildlife that was present. The ground lizards have increased by 6-fold. The tree lizards have increased by 3-fold. And we even saw our first bat, which was a very big deal. And so you're probably wondering, back to invasive species and climate action, how are these things interrelated? And simply, a changing climate means changing habitats. And this is going to be threatening the species, such as the ground lizard here on the right, that are depending on them. And climate change creates favorable conditions for the spread of invasive species. It's hotter, it's drier, and they're able to do very well in these climate changes. But our native wildlife is not able to adapt so quickly, and so they're the most vulnerable and with reduced climate resilience. But through our work, we realized that conserving and restoring ecosystems is crucial for tackling the climate crisis, and that doing eradications like we do builds the resilience against future introductions, especially in small island developing states like ours. And so you're probably wondering, how did you guys do this? And this will be where, this is not where Arika comes in. Lastly, the overall conservation impact is through the economy. We've promoted sustainable livelihoods and the tourism sector. Like we saw, the knock-on effects of the restored ecosystems is not just the species. And we've put conservation at the center of conversations about the environment and climate action. So now you're wondering, how do you get it done? And in comes Arika.
So, how do we get this done? For one thing, we have significant international support. Now, one of the things that Shanna may have mentioned was that we found the snake in 1995. It was two locals who were walking through Great Bird Island, and they found it, and they were like, what? They raised the alarm and told the international community that this was something that was special and that we needed to save it. And one of our partners, Fauna and Flora International, who's right in the back, so we can say a little wave, they jumped in and recognized that not just for us, but internationally, this had importance. And so they provided us, and all of our supporters provide both technical and financial resources for us to do this very important work. So on the screen is many of our donors and supporters over the years. And we could not be able to do any of this without their support. We're very happy, in fact, to have the government of Antigua and Barbuda here with us today, as well as FFI, and the Anguilla National Trust over there as well, because all of these partners and sponsors help us to get this done. So it's local, it's regional, and we're definitely international. What we have done especially is to really build on local capacity. We believe very strongly that the work that we're doing needs to be done by Antiguans and Barbudans. So our team of 6 is completely Antiguan. Locals who have gone off to university and developed the skills and expertise to do the work. Yes, we are supported, but first of all, we as Antiguans are doing this work. But then we don't say, we're good, we're strong, we know it. No. We share our information with locals. And so, during this pandemic, we have been able to engage over 30 volunteers in bird and lizard surveys, going off to the offshore islands, 23 of them in fact, surveying them and identifying for us what species are there. And this is very important because it adds to international data, local data, and it tells a story about conservation. But we haven't stopped there. We also engage communities. We believe that the people who live alongside these offshore islands need also to know about what is so important about these natural resources. So we engage them and let them know what is out there and how does that link with their cultural and traditional practices. But we've also then gone even further to help them to identify how can they be a part of environmental decision making. Now, what does that mean? Understanding and knowing laws and policies in Antigua and Barbuda and how they intersect with that. And so I'm very even pleased to see Ruth Spencer here, one of the champions of the Escazú Agreement, which focuses on giving locals access to environmental justice. We believe in a dynamic approach to outreach. We don't believe in just having presentations. We believe in dressing up like the Barbuda warbler, just like we would at Carnival, and dancing with children and telling them about something that's special about their country. Now, the Barbuda warbler can only be found in Barbuda. So then, of course, if you're in Antigua, maybe we could dress up like a Barbuda warbler so you can see what she looks like, right? We believe that it's important to showcase our culture and our unique landscapes and seascapes through dynamic approaches. Now, some of the key lessons from our outreach and from our engaging with all of these different people are that we ensure that conservation work is conducted by Antiguans and Barbudans. Sorry. Because they're able to not just implement the work, but they also influence policy. As an environmental awareness group, we also sit on the Technical Advisory Committee for the Department of Environment. And as technicians, we are able to offer support and expertise based on our own experiences. And so that influences local policy. But we also know that other NGOs are a part of that work as well, and that is key. We know that our work also contributes to statistical and environmental monitoring databases. And that shows us what is happening with our biodiversity over time. So not just what happened yesterday, taking a beautiful picture with a booby and thinking this is fantastic. But no, knowing how many boobies have been there, are they moving? And if they've moved, what has caused that change? Obviously, this all then feeds into us meeting our multilateral environmental agreements. And that is key for the Department of Environment in your reporting. So we're helping you out quite a bit. And finally, again, we believe that this also removes the idea of parachute environmentalism, where somebody comes in, saves the day, and flies away. No. When you fly away, you take away with you your expertise, your knowledge. And a part of that is that when it's a part of who we are, it means that even our traditional knowledge, our understanding, our culture is built into the work that we do. And is built into the love for what we do as well, and how we can then ensure that future generations are a part of that work as well. So, what do we need?
You see the look on the Grackle's faces. First of all, we need the recognition that the climate and biodiversity crises cannot be tackled separately.
We also need the recognition that the role of NGOs in furthering locally led climate action should be put to the forefront.
Very importantly, we need support through mobilizing climate finance that puts biodiversity at its core, especially for groups like the EAG, a little shameless plug, for the work that we are doing on the ground.
And also, we need ambitious commitments. Ambitious commitments that result in concrete action at the international, but most importantly, at the local level.
And so for us, the question for COP26 is, what happens next?
Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Yep. And do you have any, and we invite Simone to moderate questions. Oh, I think this is yours.
Wow. Can we give the EAG another round of applause? So I've been out of Antigua for a while, and just hearing the amazing work that they've been doing just gave me goosebumps. I'm sure everyone can agree that, their team is small and they're able to do so much. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you've been doing. Okay, the fun part. So I'd like to open the floor to questions. Anyone? Yes, Dr. Cooper? Can you hear? They can't hear. Sorry, everyone. We're just rectifying some audio issues. 1 second. Okay, so we have another question from our Minister of Blue Economy.
Thank you for that question. So did everyone hear the question? So the question was whether the EAG gets funding from the government or subventions that support our work. And the answer to that very shortly is no. We have been working considerably to raise funds through project writing to get all of this funding. And when you look at just for the Offshore Islands Conservation Program, which was the one that spoke about the Antiguan racer, with over 25 years of work in that area, that is several $million US dollars that has been raised to constantly do that work. So our fundraising is a significant part of what we do, and so we really do encourage all who are listening to, send out the feelers into the world, because fundraising is very difficult, especially when you have to fundraise and still go out into the field.
And if you're feeling generous right now, we do have a link that you can donate to the EAG that will be circulated at the end of the meeting.
And I also have a few questions. Okay. So, what are some of the challenges that you've encountered during your work, other than financing, noting that that is one of the most significant ones, and how have you overcome that?
So very interestingly, earlier this week, we were passing the Green Climate Fund's discussion side panel, and they were speaking about the importance of aligning government policy with action. And a significant problem that local communities do find is that there are policies that the government has, but there is sometimes an inability to complete that policy loop because of the debt crisis or what their own financial situations. And so that then puts a strain on our natural resources, because our development then takes a forefront, and natural conservation, it really does not. So how we have responded to that is through constantly doing the work that we do. And the EAG has developed a discipline of hope, which means that despite the development that we see in our country, or despite the degradation sometimes of natural resources, we continue to push and we continue to do that work, and we share our message. And sharing the message then encourages others to do work in other areas as well.
Okay, we have two more questions. A few more. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you so much to Erica and Shana. I think it probably was the best, I would say, side event I've been to since being here. Oh, and it's fantastic to see locally led action, led by Antiguans, for Antiguans. And what I noted is the connection with action and capacity building, as well as awareness raising and access to environmental justice. And what I wanted to find out is, how have you all been able to integrate the access to environmental justice in the work that you are doing on conservation and on locally led climate action? Because without that, you will not have that buy-in and support from the communities who so need to be involved in action, as well as decision making, as well as ensuring that priorities for conservation and climate action is where it's supposed to be. So I wanted to just find out, what are some of your, I would say, advice and solutions to tackling these issues? Thank you.
A very heavy question.
Solutions to tackling environmental justice. Sasha. So I think one of the things that EAG is good at is always having an open door. And so we at least engage with communities very quickly, as well as recognizing when there's an issue and having discussions on it. we are open about that. So in last year, I think we would have had at least three panel discussions on the Escazú Agreement, on our special economic zones, on even COP26, and what does that mean? So for us, our thing is, let's talk. And it's not just EAG talking, because in some cases we are not the experts. So we bring in the experts, whether it is from government or other NGOs, we all have that conversation together. After the conversation, we then continue to make that connection with government and whatever they're doing. So for the Department of Environment, I think they presently are working on an access to justice program. And we've been very open with them about what does this really mean for an environmental defender? So, an example, as an environmental defender, am I afraid that I will be victimized or my family will be victimized because of what I've said in the public sphere? And we're open about that. We're open with government and open with ourselves about how we feel. And so we're hoping to see when those regulations come in, that they reflect very strongly the feelings of environmental defenders in Antigua and Barbuda, and that it is not just a lovely paper, but it is actionable.
And then just to add on to that, Sasha, I would also say that one big thing for us with the whole communities and getting them engaged is that we're not just going to have a presentation, deuces, we checked off a box, and we're done. We believe in building these relationships with these communities, so continuously checking in with them, continuing to engage them, even if it's something that we think, oh, this might be of interest with you guys, making sure that they see EAG as a trusted source so that when they're hearing the information, they're like, this is our people, man. To the point where we are adjacents. We're adjacent Paramites and adjacent Willikites and really working. I mean, if you look at this picture, you see the communities. You see them right there, right? Looking at the offshore islands. And so for us, it all starts with making sure that those people trust us and are willing to understand and absorb the information that we're providing to them. Oh, Zach. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We'll have your question now. Can you? So for our next questions after this, we'll have Zachary and then Sasha and then Ruth.
All right, thank you so much. That was a great. You guys are doing. Thanks. I'm just looking for my acts on some of these invasive species. Have you noticed that certain bird species may not be in the winter months like they used to? Or are you seeing changes in feeding and anything like that for your snakes, lizards, etc.? Are you actually seeing any impacts, or are you at least looking towards monitoring those impacts?
That seems like a me question. Thank you for that point. Thank you for that point. In fact, I just had this discussion last week at a Caribbean racers. So we actually have a lot of racers in the Caribbean, and we actually are starting a working group. And I just brought up this point to them about the fact that we really need to be looking into the climatic impacts that are going to happen with the snakes. Our racers love to be around people. People love to bring garbage. So we have this constant battle of rats and stuff always trying to be on the offshore islands and dealing with the snakes. And I will say the EAG, we have prioritized looking at for the next set of projects because we've been consistently looking at the existing threats, and we recognize that climate, we have to incorporate that. So for the next wave of projects, we've already started designing them so that they will look at what the impacts of climate will be. In fact, I think Anguilla, they actually have a project right now where they're modeling what the climate will be and seeing how the species will be adjusting to that. But because we've been doing this work for so long, and you're talking about species moving with the birds, I can tell you specifically the sooty terns. We used to have a colony of them nesting right here on Great Bird Island with us, and we've realized that they've moved. They've gone. Luckily we have some more offshore islands. Like I said, we have 51 of them, so they are on one of EAG's priority islands where the rats are consistently kept off of the island. But if something happens to that island, where are the birds gonna go, right? And so looking at something such as phenotypic mismatch, like are the birds coming earlier when all of the insects have already hatched and gone about their business? Those are the kinds of things that we at the EAG are incorporating into our programs. Thank you for that question, though. Zach is next. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Go ahead.
It kind of ties into the question that I was going to ask. Is the mic working? Everyone's hearing well? Great. So the question that I was going to ask ties into the endemic, sorry, wrong word, I'm learning as well. The invasive species being the black rat. I actually did not know until I watched this presentation that rats also eat vegetation, and the pictures that you showed was a very clear display of how much damage invasive species such as rats can do. So my question was, as it relates to Antigua and Barbuda, which are larger than the offshore islands, is there any future plan as to how we can deal with rats which may affect our vegetation on a wider scale, such as agriculture, exports, black pineapples might be affected as well. So I was just wondering about that.
Very good question, Zachary. Something that EAG gets a lot. But unfortunately, our geographic scope is limited to the offshore islands. One of the biggest things is the fact that rats, they can stow away anywhere. They can fit in any space. And so it's extremely difficult to keep them out of the whole of Antigua and Barbuda. But there is, of course, a solution. Thank God we're in 2021, we're in the future. And there's actually something called a mainland island that you can do. Right now, I didn't mention them, but St. Lucia, they now have the world's rarest snake. Their own is down to 20 individuals. But because their offshore islands are not suitable enough, they're now investing in a very expensive biosecure fence that you build. You basically create an island on the mainland, where you build a fence based on which invasives you want to keep out. So whether it's African snails, Cuban frogs, rats, mongooses, etc. And in that area, that's where you're able to have the wildlife. I will say those are very expensive. As much as the EAG would love to be able to reintroduce, for example, the Antiguan racers back to Antigua, it would be extremely difficult to get rid of, the rats and mongooses. And I think a big thing as well, especially a lot of Antiguans in here, mongooses are not really seen as invasive species either. People just think of them as Caribbean squirrels. You just see them running around the road, try to rev up your car to catch them, and you never do, and you never see them again. But for us, we didn't even mention this aspect of because we do a lot, but for our turtle work that we do, mongooses come and eat a whole clutch of turtle eggs one time. So they are a very big problematic species for us. And so it is possible, Zach, but building that fence, it's not feasible. Yeah, full stop. Maybe we can introduce racers to Barbuda in 50 years. Next question, please.
Morning, everyone. I just want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed both of you. Your presentation was amazing. I like the fact that, and I just wanted to comment first to say that the way how you mobilize your financing, building synergies and partnerships, education and awareness, building the capacity of your staff, but also the community and also school children, it's commendable. Both of you, even just watching your presentation, it shows the passion that you have, and we want more environmental defenders like you guys, like really and truly. My question is, what are some of your immediate needs that you would like to be addressed, and is there an estimated cost for that?
That's an Erika question.
So, if anybody has ever worked for an NGO, you know that what is funded is the project itself, the action. So, if you need boots, if you need bait, if you need boat rides, everybody's like, yes, I will give you much, much money. That's not even a thing, but they'll give you the money. But do I need the staff to go on the boat? Oh, I have to pay for that? Maybe not. So the challenge for an NGO is actually funding the staff. The fact that EAG has 6 going on 7 people working full time every single day is significant, and we have to raise the funds to do that. So for an immediate need, quite honestly, is a sustainable financing mechanism for the environmental awareness group, and one that is not tied to tourism. A lot of times when I think there's every time I hear about a mechanism that people want to start for an NGO, they're like, oh, well, why don't you do tours? We aren't tour guiders. We are conservationists. That's what we do every day. We can have fun with you and it will be great, but that's not our day bread. We can't do that and still do conservation. So we need to somebody needs to come up with a unique idea. That's also, sadly, not our job. We would love for somebody to get that job and figure out how can we develop sustainable financing mechanisms for NGOs that doesn't involve them going outside of the scope of their work. The end. Oh, Ruth. Mhm.
Strong legislation.
Yes.
And when our government can just override it,
Yes.
do what they want,
Mhm.
I don't like that. That is worrying for me
Yes.
because it put our names on the line.
Yes.
Minister Jonas, you have a task ahead of you. We NGOs and local community groups, we want to be seen as stakeholders. We signed on to the ESCAZU, we ratified it. We want to be a part of the local consultative processes. We do not want development to override
Right.
environment.
Mhm.
We're going to suffer. We're a small island developing state, very vulnerable. And when our ecosystems are put at risk, when our survival, the future generation survival is at risk, it's very worrying. And I want the message at COP. My message is we are stakeholders. We need to be included in decision making because the donors are going to put that as a safeguard.
Yes.
Is there the local consultations? Did they take place? Did the local people have ownership and buy into these projects? Otherwise, our future work like what the EA is doing. My work with local community groups are going to be at stake.
Yes. Yes.
To that, if you don't mind. You see, as government, right? Miss Spencer, thank you very much for that. And you know, I have seen your work, and I admire your work. Okay, you've worked with my communities as well, in my own community, and that is very commendable. Now, as government, we have to strike a balance between development and preserving our environment. Whenever you're going to do a development, you want to build a hotel, for example. Many of the investors want to build hotels on beaches. There's always a cost. There's always an environmental cost. You have to, if you want to build a house that you live in, Miss Spencer, you know you have to grade off the soil and destroy all the plants and animals that live there just to build your own house that you live in. But the benefit is that you get a comfortable home that you and your family can be happy in. Likewise, as government, we seek ways to diversify our economy. We are very dependent on tourism, and the COVID-19 has exposed us big time. We had to literally shut it down. We survived on borrowed money, basically. We owe a lot of our suppliers that we have done business with for years, and they continue to supply us with a lot of things that we need to feed our people and to get by. In order for us to continue, we have to diversify our economy. Now, I believe you're referring to the special economic zones, the others, and um, some of them may not have performed. You know, it's an investment. And anytime you do investment, sometimes they perform well, sometimes they don't. One success in a special economic zone is the AUA College, AUA University. Many of you are familiar with that. AUA contributed between 5 and 6%. One company contributed between 5 and 6% to Antigua's GDP. That is tremendous. To agriculture, I was agriculture minister, as you know, for a time. And agriculture contributed, with all the farmers we have and all the grounds that we have on the agriculture, it's only 1.5% to our GDP. 1.5% agriculture contributed, while one company in a special economic zone contributed 5%, between 5 and 6%. So you see, as a government, when you look at that, how would you make your decisions when it comes to investments? We would go for more special economic zones, obviously. Because if one company in a special economic zone is contributing 5%, you can see that, you know, we would want to examine that. I know you want to come back at me. But I'm just letting you know that we have to weigh the costs and the benefits as a government. It's the responsible thing to do, because when you have 100,000 children to feed, that's about the population of Antigua, you have to really think of how you're going to put bread on everybody's table. And that really is the bottom line. We're not into environmental destruction and that sort of thing. We want, and this is why I'm here. This is why I'm here to listen. I'm now Minister of Blue Economy, as you know, and I'm here to listen. One of the last questions I wanted to put to Ms. Hill and Ms. Challenger, I see that they're doing a lot on the land. I did ask them about that yesterday, and I'm going to put it to them today. They're doing a lot on the land. They have gotten rid of the rats on Redondo. They have restored it well, and they're looking at the race of snakes and that sort of thing. But what about the ocean space around Redondo? Are there any invasive species? What is going on under the water? Are we going to be, because, as I told you, I'm going to be signing an agreement on Friday to declare the 30 by 30 agreement. And we're looking into ocean conservation as well. Now, this is a key area for development. But I have to tell you that some development, blue economy related, are going to be coming to bear on Antigua and Barbuda over the next year. That is going to have significant environmental impact on the country. I expect that a lot of you environmentalists are going to be fighting me on this and so on. But as I said, we have to weigh the costs and the benefits. Okay? And the benefits are quite significant. Okay? And so I'm hoping that we can strike a balance as to how we go forward as a country developing ourselves. Because as I said to you before, I'm not just speaking to you as a minister, I'm speaking to you as a representative of a community where every day, you see me keep checking my phones. My constituents are not easy, you know. They don't care that I'm here in the cold. They still want their pipes fixed, their roads fixed, and they keep messaging me about these potholes and all kind of things. I have to deal with that, and I have to find money to do these things. So it's not easy as what you all think. We have to be able as a country to generate revenues. So how are we going to do that? We have to strike a balance. So we're not into destruction, but we have to have a balance as to how we develop ourselves. But talk to me about the ocean space around Redondo, because I believe I can assist with that if the AAG is willing to work with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both of your comments. To respond to both of you, I believe that striking that balance means that we must follow the principles as set out and as ratified by Antigua and Barbuda in the Escazú Agreement, which involves and engages people in the decision-making process. And I think that that will always make sure that while I think everybody won't go away smiling, but everybody will go away understanding, and that's important. So, thank you. And then responding to the marine space, we have actually just recently relaunched our Antigua Sea Turtle Project to now become the Antigua Marine Conservation Program. And we are using the same principle of starting with a species focus, which was the sea turtles that we used to monitor and so on, and then now taking it into a full ecosystem approach. So looking at seagrass beds, coral reef restoration, and how all of those things work together. Because you can't be monitoring a turtle and not knowing what it eats, what eats it, and the ones that live in our own spaces, because a lot of times we're just looking at the ones that are visiting, but we actually have quite a few foraging, living green turtles in our waters. So we do need to do some monitoring and identify how we can assist those spaces to be stronger and more resilient as well. As it relates to Redondo, Shanna will speak about that.
Right. So very briefly about Redondo, as we were doing the work on the terrestrial side, we did do a baseline of the marine environment as well. Actually, having dived it myself, Redondo's reefs are a lot different than Antigua's own. They're volcanic and not limestone, and there's actually a very large population of critically endangered hawksbill turtles foraging around Redondo because there's a lot of sponges, and that's their favorite food. Speaking of invasive species, there are invasive species around Redondo. There's an invasive species of seagrass. Well, it's introduced. They haven't decided whether it's invasive. It's kind of taking over and displacing native species, but it's not causing a problem yet. So an introduced / invasive species of seagrass there, as well as, of course, lionfish, which are everywhere. So that is the invasive side of Redondo. But definitely, as Arika said, about being involved in the conversation, involved in the decision making, and we would be happy to work with the blue economy to get, mutual benefit for the benefits of people and wildlife. Are there any other questions, or are we out of time? Is everybody stunned in silence? Too many points? Oh, we'll have a question from Devon.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, wow. Mine is not really a question, just a thank you for all the work that you guys have been doing. And I don't know if you guys know, I'm from Anguilla. My name is Devon. I work at the Anguilla National Trust. And
The mic.
yeah, and I have done some training in Antigua from the EAG, and they are very good people. Hello.
Yes.
So
Oh, wait. Go again.
so we tend to do a lot of work and training amongst ourselves. Like a lot of NGOs within the region, we tend to share our experiences, and that's how the best way to learn, especially in a small Caribbean region. It's best to use each other to help improve each other's situations back home in our Smile Island states. So I'd like to thank you for this presentation as well. Amazing. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Devon. And so that's another, y'all, the EAG is doing a lot. That's another thing we have done, regional training of trainers. So I'm going to pass it along to Simone, and then we're going to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for your time so far.
Thank you, everyone, for the questions. It's been a really insightful conversation, and I just have one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. So linking it back to EAG, biodiversity, conservation, and climate action, what are some of the challenges or some of the disadvantages of, linking climate action and conservation? Can you elaborate on that? And part two, what further support do you believe is needed by not just NGOs like yourself, but NGOs and CSOs in Antigua for participating in forums like this and, regionally as well? So what are some of the challenges you've experienced?
I think I'll just answer the last question because I do know that we're over time. But one of the challenges I found with just engaging with this process in climate change issues kind of feel very far away from you, despite the fact that we're very vulnerable and we all know it's happening. Civil society organizations don't understand the thematic areas. No one's really explaining it to them. No one's explaining to us, is what I prefer to say. We're not engaged in the process nearly enough. We are doing a lot in our communities, and it's amazing the amount of work that is going on in communities, and Sasha and Ruth can tell you everybody's on the ground, but the fact of the matter is that we're not engaged in terms of what's really happening at the negotiation level, and we need to understand it better, and we hope to see greater involvement from all of you. Thank you so much all for coming, and goodbye.